Hi, I'm Tim. I'm the lead maintainer of Next.js at Zeit. I started building my own websites, basically starting out with WordPress and doing pretty simple websites for friends of the family or friends that had businesses that they wanted to promote. After high school, I had to do this internship because basically in the Netherlands you have a pre-bachelor thing that you have to do in order to go to do a bachelor in some cases. So I did this IT management degree basically, and that included a half a year of internships, and I ended up at this digital agency, and this digital agency was basically we actually don't know if you can program because you're doing this IT management stuff, but we'll give you the chance to prove yourself. I started there when I was at the end of 17 or so, and I just started programming stuff internally, building internal tools. And then eventually they offered me a job, and I decided to take that instead of going to do a bachelor in computer science. We were basically using all these open source tools like WordPress and Magento, for example, and we were building a lot of plugins, custom plugins for WordPress, and I ended up putting some of them online on GitHub basically. And that's how I got introduced to oh, you can actually put this stuff out in the open and people find it useful in some cases. Then I just got more involved and more involved into other projects that I found just really interesting in my free time. I ended up working at Zeit to work on Next, but as a side effect of doing that, I ended up co-authoring a bunch of libraries that Zeit internally was building, or we talked about it, or I was advising on several projects. So one of them was actually already out, and it was called Hyper. I started doing good first issue type issues, which is what maintainers mark as these are the easy ones that you can get started with in order to contribute more to the project. Changing some documentation or updating 3 lines of code inside of the code base. But they really helped with learning how this code base works, and also learning more about JavaScript, because I wasn't doing JavaScript at the time. Starting to contribute to open source was that I basically, it might sound really weird, but I didn't have to know all the things that made up this framework or this tool. I just had to know where to fix bugs basically, and then apply that, and then basically get gradually into how I can contribute more to this project and know how it works exactly. And then basically while I was at Zeit, Guillermo had an idea which was, let's make a markdown format that can actually hold dynamic elements. And he had been thinking about that for 2 years or so. Then there was another person, John Neutkens, that over the weekend had built the whole implementation for that library. We called the format MDX. So I saw that post and I reached out to him. I was like, hey, do you want to work together on this stuff? Because there were a lot of optimizations that could be made, massive improvements in how the actual architecture of the thing worked. So I reached out to him. I was like, hey, I can actually help on this because we need it for Zeit. And he was like, yeah, sure, let's collaborate. So it was really a really good open source story, because we just put out the actual spec for it in the open, and then someone else, completely random, we never met him before, just went in and was like, oh, I built this thing over the weekend because I found it really interesting and I was super intrigued by the idea. And then we refined it over time. We did many weeks of development on it together, and we ended up with an implementation that was really performant and that can still be improved over time. I was 20 at the time, I think, end of 20, and I had worked on Next.js, the thing I work on now full time, for almost a year by then. And I was working on it pretty much full time next to my job. So it's doing crazy amounts of hours into the project, just because I found it super interesting. It wasn't as popular as it is today, but it was just really, for me, a learning thing. So eventually they made me co-author of Next after I spent a significant amount of contributions into the project. And then eventually I sent a message to Guillermo being hey, if you ever looking for someone, then like please reach out to me, because I would be pretty interested, because like you're working on all this open source stuff that I'm helping out with, and yeah, it would be pretty cool. Then a few months later went by basically, and then he reached out to me. He was like, hey, do you want to come to San Francisco actually to visit our conference that we're organizing, which was the first edition of Site Day, as a guest. So they basically like flew me to San Francisco, introduced me to the whole team and stuff, and then Guillermo offered me a job, and I ended up not taking it for various reasons. I waited like another 6 or 7 months or so, and then I was like, oh, I really want to do this thing. I'm like sure that I want this, and yeah, I'll go do this, like working on Next and actually making it work. Yeah. So I joined Zeit in the end of 2017, basically 2 years ago exactly right now, and I was the only person working on Next at the time, full time, and I basically ended up maintaining it by myself for like over a year, until we started hiring more people into my team, and then I became like the lead maintainer. I'm now in charge of like road mapping, like deciding on the roadmap and making sure that like everyone is still like working, or like not so much working because we know that they're working, but if they're actually like working on the right stuff that we want to put out. And I'm like talking to customers or people that use Next, and I'm like, hey, is this going to work for you? And why is it going to work for you? Why is it not going to work for you? And then I can relay that to the team and tell the team like, oh, actually these companies are doing this thing that is completely different than the way that we have been thinking about it, just because we don't know like their insights. So it really helps for me that I can like go out there and talk to others to see like what they're doing or what they want to do, and get that feedback back to my team basically. In terms of scaling the project itself, the things I learned was mostly like, I knew like a lot of JavaScript already, mostly when I started contributing to Next itself, because I had worked on Hyper and other projects. But then I basically learned a lot about compilers, how they work, like how like Babel works, for example, under the hood, or how Webpack works under the hood. I contributed a bunch of stuff to both projects actually, to improve either like memory usage, and basically there's just a lot of, I think the realization that I made when I like started scaling up like the open source stuff that we do is that a lot of projects out there are being maintained, but they could also use some help from other people that have like a lot of expertise, for example. So the specific things that we learned from like the Google Chrome engineers, so they work in the Google Chrome organization, are mostly related to like how to reduce bundle size and optimize like the way that JavaScript is output to browsers. So say what we currently have in Next is that we have maybe like one JavaScript bundle for a page. But what the Google engineers like started investigating is how they could apply like chunking of pages. So if like one module is shared between 2 pages, how to make that a separate JavaScript file that's only loaded when those pages are requested, instead of putting them into like a common bundle where like you're shipping like this massive chunk of JavaScript to all users basically. One thing I would advise myself going back is to not weight everyone's opinion super heavy, because it could be that it's just like one person being super vocal on like GitHub issues or Twitter or I don't know where, like Reddit or something like that, and they could be like super mean. They might mean well actually, but they could be like communicating in a really like harmful way. But that's still just one person, and there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of people using your software, and those don't have issues, or they're not telling you their issues, but overall, people that have issues will actually go to GitHub and submit an issue. I guess that the thing I'm most excited about is the pace at which improvements come, while retaining all the standards that people already use. So like UI frameworks like React, Vue, Angular, Ember, Svelte, for example. Those have really taken off and have gotten really big. Like almost everyone's using them. They improve that whole experience and make it available for beginning programmers, but also to companies that want to build really large apps. Basically, we saw that a lot of people use React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, for example, or Ember, and it was further verified through MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, I think. They basically put out a survey, and 28,000 people replied to it. And it resulted in 72% of people that replied to the survey were using some kind of UI framework, like the ones I mentioned. I hope that Next is still going to be around by then. Framework churn and how the ways go in JavaScript world, it might not be around. But I really like what I'm doing right now, so I hope that I can continue improving people's lives by making better developer tools.